If you know anything about my position on passenger rail, you know that I'm definitely pro-passenger rail, but at the same time, I like to keep things realistic. Many people have been asking me about the recent proposal of an overnight train between Montreal and Boston. Because some of these people seem to think that this train is closer to reality than just a proposal, I've decided I need to point out some of the flaws with the train and why I think there's a chance it may fail. However, before we tear the proposal apart, we first need to understand exactly what the proposal is and what the expectations are. I've been unable to locate any original proposal, and it seems like the various media outlets are either copying each other or interpreting an unknown source with their own spin. MassTransitMag.com begins by sharing the towns and cities the train would, quote, pass through. I'm already seeing problems here, but we'll return to that. The article then states that the 14-hour trip is double what it would take to drive, but be cheaper than flying. A quote, recent study estimated that about 1,000 passengers a day would travel between Montreal and Boston via train. That figure supposedly doubles between Montreal and Sherbrooke, Quebec. Supposedly, the only problem found so far with the train would be the funds needed to upgrade the Canadian Pacific line between Sherbrooke and Montreal. Once again, I see more problems here, but we'll return to this later. The purpose of the train is stated quite clearly: to give city-dwelling Canadians a means of traveling to vacation destinations such as Old Orchard Beach and Boston. The article then continues about service within Maine, which I personally have a lot less issue with and think could go ahead much easier. So let's go back to the prospect of the train bringing passenger service to places such as Island Pond, Vermont or Auburn, Maine. While the train's route is planned to pass through those places, the investors and planners have little incentive to add a station and stop for a very small handful of people. Not only are the majority of the towns on the route small, but the train is planned as an overnight run, meaning the train will call in these towns anywhere from 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. Not a nice time to get up and go catch a train. Not to mention that intermediate travelers would have a harder time getting a sleeper room, leaving them to sleep in a coach seat. The second problem, as often is with train travel, is the lengthy duration of the trip. It takes just over 5 hours to drive between Montreal and either Boston or Portland. The estimated train travel duration is 14 hours, meaning that boarding the train at 6 p.m. in either Montreal or Boston results in you stepping off at or after 8 a.m. the next day. Not only does the train take nearly 3 times the length of driving, the various lines on the route are all single-tracked. To make matters worse, the St. Lawrence and Atlantic, which the train would travel on a considerable distance, has run their freights at night for as long as I can remember. The third problem I see is a ridership problem. Sure, you don't really need a car in Boston, but you kind of do in Old Orchard Beach, Auburn, Portland, and other destinations of the route. At over $200 a person, wouldn't it be cheaper for your average family of 4 just to rent a car? Now let's look at the infrastructure needed to add an additional 2 daily trains to the proposed route. Apparently the St. Lawrence and Atlantic route, which sees a handful of trains a week, is up to passenger standards. I find that odd, but we'll go with it. The CP Sherbrooke subdivision supposedly needs upgrades, and of course let's not forget that either the former Grand Trunk line or the CSX Freight Main from Auburn to Portland will need massive upgrades. Also, these are all lines that don't normally have to facilitate meets between trains and are essentially all single track. By essentially doubling your trains per day, how many sidings do you have to add? Where will the 2 passenger trains themselves pass? What if one train is late? It will have to subsequently affect the other. The south or eastbound train should have less problem on District 2, where traffic is the heaviest, but the north or westbound train will be thrown right into the thick of evening operations. Will the overnight train have priority over Amtrak? Will it even have priority over freight? If it isn't an Amtrak train, it's essentially at the mercy of the freight dispatchers, who won't be too happy having to deal with an extra 2 daily trains. Now all of this time I've been assuming that the train will indeed be a daily operation. Perhaps that's a misconception on my part. However, here's where I'd like to shift from talking about the problems to proposing some solutions. I think that a train marketed to vacationers, sightseers, and tourists would not be very successful as a daily train, especially during the off-season. Running a seasonal train would be quite costly, however, as the equipment and track would need to be continuously maintained anyway. My thought is that the equipment be used as a tourist shuttle during the summer, but take a different role during the off-season. I'd like to compare this service to 2 very different trains. While the Boston to Montreal corridor is a means of transportation rather than the vacation itself, I think it could learn a lesson from these two other passenger trains. The Rocky Mountaineer operates in Western Canada and in the US as a luxury land cruise showcasing both scenery and the cities along the route. I think the train en route could be used for a similar purpose, with guests traveling overnight on the train to places such as Montreal, Boston, or even other destinations such as St. John. Guests could have a day or multiple days to explore the cities either on their own or in chartered guided tours. The American Association of Private Railcar Owners runs an interesting train during October called the Autumn Explorer. Over the course of several days, the train visits towns across Vermont, sometimes for a couple hours and sometimes for the night. This route could host a similar train targeted especially at retired couples looking for an alternative to a cruise or vacation. As a daily train for commuters and vacationers or a more leisurely tour train, I think the Boston to Montreal route certainly has some potential. There are still countless unanswered questions, such as who would even operate the train and where all the money needed is going to come from. Until the politicians tell us more, let's remember that while the route could be a great stepping stone for the passenger rail in the Northeast, it is a long, long way from reality. I'm North Country Trains. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.